My name is Ivona Alfred, and I welcome you to today's webinar, Maximizing Micromobility, Linking Bikeshare and Public Transport in Jakarta and Chennai. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll begin in a minute when we have more participants in the room. In the meantime, feel free to drop in the chat your greetings, share your name, as well as city that you are tuning from, and we'll begin shortly. Again, thank you so much for joining. We'll begin the programming in just a few seconds. And feel free to say who you are, introduce yourself, and tell us where you are tuning from. Thank you. Hello, Ame. Good morning. Hello, Leticia. Hello, Sergio. Hello, Dan. Hello, Lorena. All right, we are just about to begin. Welcome everyone again. This is a session in conjunction with ITDP Cycling Cities campaign, which brings cities, NGOs, civil society, and private sector partners together towards a common goal, which is increasing safe cycling in cities. The Cycling Cities series strives to share best practices, tools, and technical guidance with like-minded cities, practitioners, and decision makers. There are a few technical points about this session. We are offering simultaneous interpretations in Bahasa Indonesia, and the listeners who would like to use the feature can access the language channel by clicking the globe icon at the bottom of the Zoom window and making the selection. On the mobile phone, this service is also available under More button, and you can select language interpretation there. You can also tag along the live transcription during the webinar by clicking the CC, closed captioning function, also found in the bottom of your Zoom window. As always, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel. During the session, feel free to share remarks or ask questions in the chat box, but reserve the Q&A box for questions to the panelists that we'll incorporate later. So with that, I wanted to welcome everyone again to this webinar, which will shed some light on best practices, increasing multimodal integration, focusing on bikeshare pilots in Chennai and Jakarta. We'll also hear a few highlights stemming from the Maximizing Micromobility report, which is a compendium of actions for cities to help bolster access, equity, safety, resource efficiency, and health and climate benefits through micromobility integration. So let's welcome an exciting panel of speakers from ITDP. We'll first hear from Mackenzie Allan, Senior Research Associate at ITDP Global, who is a co-author of several publications focusing on non-motorized public transport. She will give us an overview of what is micromobility and the types of integration stemming from the report. Next, we'll hear from Pranjal Kulkarni, Deputy Manager within the Sustainable Urban Development Program at ITDP India. Pranjal will talk about the process of physical integration of Bikeshare with public buses in Chennai. And we'll also have Smriti Prasad, Public Transport Associate from ITDP India, who will also contribute to the presentation. Our third speaker, Carlos Nemesis, is an Urban Planning Associate at ITDP Indonesia. He will present on information integration in Jakarta, a process that complemented the development of bike sharing system and pop-up bike lanes in 2020. And he will talk about interesting behavioral science approaches to developing wayfinding. So I wanted to invite the first presenter, Mackenzie Allan.
Thanks very much, Mona. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So Mona will be presenting my slides, but I just want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone on the webinar. I can't see the slides yet, so I just want to make sure that they're there.
1 second, I am pulling it up and it should be visible now.
Thanks, Mona. As Mona mentioned, my name is Mackenzie Allan, and I am a Senior Research Associate on the global team at ITDP. It is wonderful to be here and to see you all here. I'll be providing a short introduction to today's webinar by giving a brief overview of the Maximizing Micromobility report, which we released in 2021. In this report, we analyze strategies cities can use to integrate micromobility with existing public transport systems. With this in mind, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge how we define micromobility at ITDP and in this report. We see micromobility as both human and electric-powered lightweight devices that typically operate at speeds below 25 kilometers per hour and are ideal for trips up to 10 kilometers. We do not include devices that are internal combustion engine powered or those that exceed speeds of 45 kilometers per hour. This means devices such as scooters, e-scooters, bikes, trikes, and skateboards are defined as micromobility, while cars and mopeds or other high-speed 2- and 3-wheelers are not considered micromobility. And we can provide links to the report and to the various infographics in this presentation. As most of us know, over the past 2.5 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen hundreds of cities and countries across the world rapidly expand their cycling infrastructure, offer free or subsidized bike share, implement new cycling action plans, and dedicate funding to cycling. There have been incredible wins worldwide, just to highlight a few of them. In India, the Cycles for Change Challenge has supported tens of cities to implement cycling-friendly initiatives and quick interventions. The first phase included 25 cycling pioneer cities who are now working to make those rapid changes into permanent cycling infrastructure solutions in phase 2. In addition, over 40 new cities have also joined for phase 2, which began in April of this year. Along Insurgentes Avenue in Mexico City, one of the most important corridors in the city, the government implemented a pop-up lane. 10 months after this temporary lane was built, it was found the number of cyclists increased over 350%, which is incredible. I wrote this wrong on the slide, so pardon the difference. In March of 2021, the mayor announced that this 14-kilometer bike lane would become permanent, which is an incredible win. In Italy, as with other countries such as France, the government implemented a subsidy for bike sales. And within the first month, over 500,000 cycles were sold, which was a 60% increase from the previous year, looking at May 2019 to May 2020. In Bogota, the government rapidly enacted a plan to add around 80 kilometers to the existing 550 kilometers cycle network. In 2020, the Mobility Secretary estimated that 70% of the people riding bikes used other forms of transport before the pandemic, which is an incredible modal shift. And finally, in New York City, a city bike had a total of 28 million rides in 2021, which was a staggering increase of 32% from the 21 million rides that occurred in 2019. So with all of this, we can see that micromobility has filled incredible gaps within urban mobility systems quickly and cost effectively. And with all of these incredible changes, it is clear, one, that micromobility proved itself as a resilient, cost-effective mode of travel that people are willing to use. And two, that it is essential that while there is momentum around micromobility, cities integrate micromodes into their long-term mobility visions and use them as tools to fulfill urban mobility gaps and meet city goals. With all of this, in this paper, we focused on different ways that cities can integrate micromobility rather than simply regulating it. To break down different types of integration, we considered 4 different categories of integration: physical, informational, payment, and institutional integration. I'll explain all of these in just a moment, but I first just want to mention that physical and informational integration are easier in many ways to implement, while payment and institutional integration are more complex due to the number of stakeholders involved, often as well as budget. The first physical integration is the physical siting of cycle infrastructure, such as bike lanes, secure parking, or bike share stations near, along, or with public transport infrastructure. For example, we can see at left a green scooter station placed in a BRT station in Bogota, and at right, a cycle lane that connects with and runs alongside the Guangzhou BRT. For informational integration, we consider this to include providing information to riders within an integrated format that encourages multimodal trips and that makes multimodal trip planning easier and more clear for the rider. The photo on the left shows wayfinding signage in London, which displays information on walking, cycling, and public transport locations and distances. And then the map on the right shows that in Rio de Janeiro, public transport maps displayed in stations and onboard vehicles have QR codes that allow riders to download and carry the map with information on both bike share and public transport with them, which helps facilitate transfers, especially after riders have left public transport stations. The third type, payment, we consider payment integration to include fare integration for the user, such as shared cards or digital wallets. So in this photo, you can see Los Angeles. In Los Angeles County, the regional tap card can be used to access public transport and metro bike share. Unfortunately, users have to register separately for accounts, but the payment can be used across both. And then in Mexico City, which is not pictured here, there is an integrated RFID card, which allows riders to access and pay for multiple public transport modes and bike share. And finally, we considered institutional integration, which is multimodal management on the back end between different governmental bodies as well as private companies. So on the left, you can see Fortaleza, Brazil. There's 4 different types of bike share available in that city. And the kind of communication and management that has to happen for that to occur is what we considered for this 4th category. There are many different benefits to integration for operators, people, and cities alike. For operators, strong integration means more users, more multimodal trips, and ideally with this, more revenue, in addition to less cost and payment inefficiencies. For cities, there's more access for all, more operational efficiency, ideally, and demand for public and non-motorized transport, as well as less duplicated services. So ideally, these modes would work together instead of duplicating the same routes that are available. For people, there are more convenient, affordable trips and less time spent traveling. In addition, there's an element of equity to think about. So when we think about individuals who need to make more varied trips, such as youth or caregivers, integration between micromobility and public transport is really important for these groups. And finally, we can also think about how linking integration between modes with more compact land use planning allows cities to locate bike share and public transport infrastructure closer to where more people live, work, and play, which increases access in turn. Importantly, integration increases access to stations, people, and destinations. So here we can see a map of Jakarta at the left and a map of Fortaleza on the right. In both, the yellow shows a 15-minute walking distance from the rapid transit station, and the green shows a 15-minute cycling distance. If we consider the population that lives within these areas, the number of people within a 15-minute trip to the station cycling is 5 times that of walking. We can think about this as increased access to stations for riders in terms of origin points, as well as increased access to goods, services, places, and people for their destination points as well. Finally, to highlight a few key takeaways from the paper, we can begin with the idea that it really is up to cities to ignite momentum for the integration. The private sector is unfortunately less motivated to do so because there is more focus on increasing the service itself and the revenues that go along with it, rather than meeting people's needs within a city and reaching urban mobility goals. Second, cities need to shift their focus from regulation of micromobility to encourage uptake of micromobility. Micromodes can help fill gaps in urban mobility systems and be part of the system if they are included in long-term transport planning, visions, and action plans, and if integration is prioritized. Third, it's important to remember that pursuing integration and expanding access go hand in hand, as shown in the last slide with the maps. And fourth, as cities focus on integration, it is important to note that integration can be phased. So starting with easier forms of integration, such as physical integration, which would include pop-up bike lanes, leading to rapid transit stations, or providing secure micromobility parking, for example. These can be done much more quickly and with lower cost than other forms of integration. And then cities, after demonstrating success, can move towards more complex types of integration as capacity and resources for these efforts grow. That was a brief overview of the publication. We'll provide a link to this in the chat, and this is the cover photo. Thank you all very much for your time. I will pass the speaker back to Ivona.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for this overview, and I'll invite Pranjal now to take the floor.
Thanks, Ivona. I'll just share my screen. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So today we are just going to talk about, based on the paper that we created, how we try to pilot the same in the city of Chennai in India. I'd just like to also take a moment to thank the teammates who were involved in this project. Those are Smriti Prasad, Vaishali, and Shiva Subramaniam from Indian team. So starting with the project, again, like mentioned in the paper as well, the private modal share in the city of Chennai had been is on the rise in the past decade, and simultaneously the modal share of cycling has been is decreasing. Number of private vehicles are constantly being added, and it has increased over 120% in the past decade. So to counter this, and with the vision to boost the use of public transport by providing the crucial last mile connectivity and thereby expanding the catchment area of the public transport itself, we started this pilot in the city of Chennai. So in Chennai, there is one, just to give you, in a couple of slides, we would like to take you through a backdrop of the context of the city and how it started. In Chennai, there is one public operator that has been appointed, that is the Smart Bike Systems, and it operates the PBS in the city. So back in 2019 August, we had, after the launch of the cycles, we had the Smart Cities Missions Director, Mr. Kunal Kumar, to have an event on event for the bicycle sharing system to create a buzz and to get people know about the system that is prevalent in the city. And subsequently, in the January 2021, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, he launched the first electric bicycles, the pedal assist bicycles in the city. This was again by Smart Bikes, and this was one of a kind at that point in the country. This adds to the existing fleet of non-electric bicycles in the city. And we'll talk more about these cycles in the coming slides. Then again, the ITDP team worked with the operator and also the Smart Cities Mission Director to create more noise and buzz about this system. We had multiple meetings, and eventually the ITDP team with the Greater Chennai Corporation, the Chennai Smart City Limited, and the metro provider, Chennai Metro Rail Limited in Chennai, and the service operator had a big launch event, and there were a few promotional events done during that day, like free rides for public, and we had great participation from the citizens. The whole idea was to create a buzz and again create noise amongst the citizens so that they know more about this service. So initiating this project, we had 4 main partners. One is the Tamil Nadu Transport Development, the Metropolitan Transport Corporation of the city, the Greater Chennai Corporation, that is the municipal body of the city, and the service provider, that is Smart Bikes. So initially, like the paper mentioned and mentioned by Mackenzie as well, that the integration is more with the rapid transit systems of the PBS. But here, already 17 out of 30 metro stations had a PBS system integrated with their stations. So what ITDP suggested to the secretary was, let us try to integrate the PBS, the the bicycle sharing system, with the bus terminals. This was the proposal, and the transport secretary agreed and was interested in this proposal, and that is how the pilot started. Initially, we identified 20 bus terminals in the city, and the pilot was to try to integrate the PBS as per our paper in one of these stations. We tried to work with the community, we tried to work with the operator, and we also worked with the city to together formulate a pilot system. So for the further presentation and how did we select the pilots, I'll invite Smriti to speak about this.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, next slide. So after having multiple discussions with the major stakeholders, we had internal discussions with the MTC officials itself to understand the kind of bus terminals that that was there within the corporation boundary to select the pilot site. So MTC recommended us like 7 bus terminals, having based on the criteria of the availability of the space, and some bus terminals were in the process of undergoing modernization, considering us integration and analysis for all these 7 bus terminals to understand the site conditions. And the major thing that was there for us is that when we were doing all this study, it was during the time of peak COVID, and we already faced a lot of challenges coordinating internally between the departments also. And then so to do this pilot, we was in the plan of choosing a pilot site where we can quickly deploy the PBS station to integrate. Next one, Pranjal. So to start with the Vallalar Nagar bus terminal, the Vallalar Nagar bus terminal is located to the north of Chennai. And as you can see in the picture on the left, it is already integrated with the bus terminal. But if you see the overall picture, the connectivity to the nearest PBS stations are pretty much low. Within a 3-kilometer radius, there are only like 3 PBS stations that are there around this Vallalar Nagar bus terminal itself, even though it has good multimodal connectivity. And then because of the same issue, and the northern Chennai as a whole did not have much of the PBS stations when we were doing this study as well, and that was a major concern with the connectivity itself. And then the next one is with the KK Nagar bus terminal. So this KK Nagar bus terminal is located in the south of Chennai, and it is a residential neighborhood. And within a 3-kilometer radius, there were like 5 PBS stations around this KK Nagar bus terminal, and it had like a good connectivity to the nearest Ashok Nagar metro also, and also the other suburban railway stations nearby. And as you can see, the PT Rajan Road, which the station 197, it is the first road in Chennai to have a cycle lane itself. So that was also an added feature to this KK Nagar bus terminal. And as you can see in the picture left, it's having ample space within the compound wall and also outside the compound wall. And to give an insight on the next bus terminal, this is the Ananagar West bus terminal. It had like a lot dense network of PBS stations around it, and also a good connectivity to the nearest metro. And we had ample space within the MTC bus terminal itself. But the major constraint what we identified when we went for the site is the condition of the ground. For a quick deployment of the PBS station, it was not possible, and the service providers had to pour concrete on the floor, had to provide ramps for the people to access it, and there were so many other concerns, even with the road front visibility, because there were continuous bus stops on the road front, and to keep a hoarding of 30 feet and to make it visible for the people to access the smart bike station itself, which is within the bus terminal, it was a major criteria for the service providers to have a visibility of the hoarding towards the road front. So even that was a major constraint here. Next one, Pranjal. And same with the Besant-Nagar condition. Besant-Nagar bus terminal is also located in this Y junction, and we have like the 2 cycle PBS stations within 200 meters and 300 meters around it, and it also has dense network around it. But this Besant-Nagar bus terminal, where we thought of integrating this PBS station, the roads were narrow and there were no footpath already in it. So for the roads to become better and then to implement, it will take a bit of time. So it was not identified even as a quick selection. And next one, Pranjal. Similar with the Tirvanur, of 10 PBS stations around it, but the condition just outside the Tirvanur station where the footpaths were dilapidated. And in the next picture, you can see that a lot of encroachment of bikes are also there. Pranjal, next. Pranjal, can you click on the next slide?
Yes, I have done that.
Yeah, okay. So with this foreshore estate, the foreshore estate bus terminal had a lot of space within the bus terminal and also around the bus terminal. But the major concern here that it was a slum neighborhood, and the service providers had a lot of constraints because this area was having a lot of vandalism issues, and the street, which you can see, which comes from the bus terminal here, did not have much of the street lights. And when we consider the aspect of safety around the connectivity, that was a major constraint here for the service providers as well. And with the next bus terminal, Mandaveli, this is also the same constraint where the service providers did not have a location to have a feasibility of this clearance of 30 feet hoardings, which can be kept on the road front so that the people will know that there is a PBS station inside the bus terminal. So these were the 7 bus terminals with the different kinds of constraints that we identified, and we made a matrix to understand in which pilot site can we deploy the station itself, and we include criteria of all the stakeholders, including the willingness of the network and also the height fall of the bus. We're looking forward that is their 30 feet hoarding that is there visible to the public, and because that is their only source of revenue which they'll be getting in the future as well. So the hoardings that is visible to the road front is also one of the major factors that the service providers had in mind. So considering all these factors, KK Nagar bus terminal were fitting most of the criteria, and we went ahead to choose the pilot with KK Nagar bus terminal. Next one, Pranjal. So conducting the pilot at the KK Nagar, this is a small image of the site itself. The KK Nagar bus depot is located 400 meters away from the Ashok Nagar metro station, and the PT Rajan Salai, the first cycle lane, which is there in Chennai, that lane is also located like 300 meters away from the bus depot. Next one. This is to give an insight about this whole site condition. So the picture 1, 2, 3, 4 will be seen on the left. So the first one is a picture of the road, main road that is adjacent to the bus terminal, and the segregation which acts as a drop point for the people to come, and whether the share autos to enter and drop, and also the buses to come and drop. This is the second one that you see next to the entry gate. This is the space that is available inside the compound wall and also the outside the compound wall, which are shown as potential areas for the pilot near the entry gate as well. And the next one is the view of the terminal from the exit gate. And then the fourth one is where the two-wheeler parking, that the bus terminal is already renting it to the public for the two-wheeler parking within the terminal itself. And then the next slide. So collectively, we all decided and came up with 2 options finally to physically integrate the PBS station with the KK Nagar bus terminal. We had option 1, where the compound with the ground condition here. The option 2 had a paved flooring already, but option 1 did not have. It is sand basically, and so we all collectively went ahead with option 2 for the quick deployment of the PBS station. And then the next one. Yeah. So this is a picture of the pilot station of Nagar bus terminal. By the mid of July into 2021, almost 10 to 14 cycles were deployed initially at the station. And then after a week of deployment of the cycles, the hoardings, the smart hoardings and the information poster were put up there. This is a poster info QR code is given. People will have to access these cycles only if you have like a smartphone, unfortunately. So if you have a smartphone, all you have to do is download the app and then you will be given the riding details here. And also the different kind of cycles and the rates are also different for the different types of cycles that are available here. And they have also mentioned about the detailed steps to go through the process of integration. That is the register. First, they have to download the app and they have to register it. They have to put some money to the wallet and then they'll have to ride the cycle and then they have to park it to the next location. Yeah. All the three types of smart cycles were also deployed at the Nagar pilot station. As you can see, the electric cycles, they were given with the pedal assist feature, which enables the riders to pedal faster, not to pedal harder. And then the next gen bikes came with these magnesium alloys, which make it very light in weight. And also the puncture proof tubeless tires, which also was very easy for maintenance. And then the standard eco bikes, which is the normal standard bikes, which had like LED lights in the front and the rear. So these were the three kind of cycles that are deployed in the station as well. Next. When we took an impact assessment of this whole Nagar pilot station, so before and after 6 months period, as for any progress to know, we will need 6 months to understand the progress of a particular pilot station. So as you can see clearly that at each of the stations, the ridership have increased immensely after the deployment of this Nagar MTC depot station. And the ridership in the overall neighborhood has also become double. So this shows the success of the pilot station in the neighborhood. But when we come to the pilots, the rides per day at the station, it is still low, which is 3 because of all the COVID condition. But again, this 3 rides is also at par with the nearest metro station that is there within the neighborhood itself. So given the high footfall of people there in the Nagar neighborhood, we are expecting more ridership with decrease in COVID constraints. Yeah. And the way forward, I think Pranjal, you will take up.
Yeah. Thanks, Priti. So yeah, just coming to the last part of the presentation, we just want to highlight that this is an ongoing process. And like mentioned by Mackenzie in the earlier presentation, physical integration was one of the easier parts. Now we are slowly moving towards informational integration as well. So we have planned social media outreach programs and some events going ahead to further bring in the ridership and increase the usage. We would be working on the wayfinding posters around the city and signage boards all across the city as a wayfinding measure to guide the users. And the ITDP team is also working with Google to integrate the bicycle plan with the existing system. So that would also lead to the digital integration with the existing setup. Talking about the commuters part, we are also trying, we couldn't do a lot of perception surveys because of COVID and the excessive rains in the city, but we have already created a survey forms and we would be rolling that out soon to get a first-hand information from the users itself, which will help us modify the project going ahead. Working on the physical integration, there are also plans of expansion. Like previously mentioned, we have identified 20 stations around the city and we would be starting to roll out the same system in almost remaining 19 stations as well. There has also been discussions on providing charging infrastructure to the existing smart bike stations, and we are working with the government and the service operator to facilitate these at every station. And there also have been discussion on incentivizing the PBS trips for the users as well to further increase the ridership. And this could work towards fare integration as well. So these were the things in the pipeline. And with this, I conclude the presentation. Thank you very much, Ivana.
Great. Thank you so much, Smriti and Pranjal. And now I will, yes, you can exit the screen share. Thank you. And now I'll invite Carlos Nemesis to talk about Jakarta.
Okay, thank you, Ivana. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all. So to start my presentation, I will give a brief explanation about the video. So last year, we made our pilot project for the first and last mile connectivity between Bikeshare and public transportation. And the video will be presented by Iwana.
Sebenarnya akan lebih seru lagi kalau banyak operator yang masuk juga gitu, jadi kita punya banyak pilihan.
Jam waktunya sampai malam, yang bisa saya goes lebih enak, kemudian nggak terlalu berat.
Transportasi yang integrasi lainnya tuh digabung aja gitu biar nggak kebanyakan aplikasi.
Bisa ditambahkan lagi titik-tambahnya, terutama di lokasi perumahan dan tempat ramai seperti kantor.
Promosi harus diberikan itu yang lebih besar, mungkin dengan banner yang lebih besar.
Kalau misalkan nggak dikasih jalur sepeda itu membahayakan orang yang bersepeda juga kan.
Kan kadang ada yang nggak bisa baca map, dikasih tau ya kita ngarahnya tuh ke arah mana. Bantu banget, soalnya kan nggak perlu kendaraan pribadi lagi, terus juga menghemat biaya sih.
Jakarta's public transport has grown and is now integrated under the Jaklingko system. However, ride-hailing services are still preferred as a major feeder. This poses an issue as they emit a large amount of air pollution. The situation took a major turn during the COVID-19 pandemic as there was a huge surge in the number of cyclists, especially in the city center's main roads. In response to the bike boom, 67 Bikeshare parking stations are currently placed in central Jakarta area, concurrent with the existence of public transportation. The pilot is planned to be expanded with an addition of 96 Bikeshare stations in areas of varying land use while involving at least 3 bike-sharing operators. Even though the users are currently dominated by sports and recreational users, there are almost 20% of users who use Bikeshare to commute to work and 13 to school. Bikeshare creates a more equal access to cycling, as 47% of users and potential users do not own a bicycle. The current major barrier for people to use Bikeshare is not only because their destinations are not yet covered by the service, but also the lack of information about the services, where to find it, and how to use it. In May 2021, a pilot of integrated wayfinding in 13 major bike-sharing stations were temporarily implemented, which required a collaboration between all stakeholders, transport agency, public transport operators, and bike-share operators. Receiving good responses from the users, Bikeshare signages are now permanently built, aligned with the protected bike lane construction. The wayfinding intervention has proven to help users of public transport to shift to bike sharing. Being a part of the public transport journey under the Jaklingko system, Bikeshare has a huge potential to compete with ride-hailing services and be the major choice as the first or last mile mode. In order to make it a reliable first or last mile mode, other forms of integration are needed, such as integrated apps, integrated fare, and more massive informational integration, both physically and digitally. E-bike sharing also has a huge potential as it met users' needs, such as to conserve energy, it is not tiring, it cuts travel time, and it is cheaper than ride-hailing services. But most importantly, a safe, secure, and comfortable infrastructure such as protected bike lanes are highly demanded by both current and potential users of Bikeshare.
Okay, thank you, Iwana, for the video. I will share my screen right now. So yeah, I hope you can see my screen. So yeah, as many other cities in the world, Jakarta also experienced bicycle boom during the early months of pandemic. Bike sharing system was then deployed along the pop-up bike lane as a response to the tenfold increase of cyclist number in Sudirman Tamrin Road in June 2020. Started with a pilot of 67 dockless bike share station, which strategically deployed near public transit. To maintain the hype of cycling, facilities and infrastructure are being pushed, even continue further in 2021. As you can see, this is several interventions that we are conducted. Number of bike share users are not much increasing, unfortunately, based on our public questionnaire in May 2021. Other than people whose origins or destination are not yet covered by bike share stations, the main reasons people are not using it was the lack of information about the services, which discourage people, even public transport users, to use it. So as an effort to promote bike sharing as a first and last mile mode for public transport passengers, pilot of wayfinding integration are implemented in 9 transit stations, directing passengers to the bike share. To assess the pilot interventions, we are focusing on the user experience by creating routes for volunteers. We observe their behavior during the journey and interview them afterwards. This method helps us to assess the effectiveness of wayfinding on directing PT passengers to bike share, the legibility of bike share map, and also to gain user perception on using bike share as a part of public transport journey. We created a mixed commuting route between multiple transport modes, from BRT, commuter rail, and MRT. We invited both existing users of bike share, non-user, and daily public transport users from various gender and age group. So in this diagram, you can see that this sums up our user experience journey assessment, where we find different behavior from different background of people. Public transport users are generally more familiar with following a physical directional sign within station area. Therefore, it was easier for them to follow through the wayfinding intervention. It's shown with the blue color one. For those who are not familiar with transit stations, they still rely more on asking ground staffs, which might be important to note that integrating with public transport operators could be a key to improve public information of bike share service, as the people tend to ask for last mile connectivity. And as we tested with non-bike share users who are not a regular cyclists, we found that a safe bike infrastructure, such as protected bike lane, is highly needed to increase the confidence of potential bike share users. You can see this with the brown colored one. So based on our evaluation, a continuous information about bike share services on platform area, concourse, or station area will help to create awareness of bike share availability on the particular station. And a repetition of bike share icon usage will help to familiarize users on apps, totems, and icons and directional signs within public transport stations. So you can see in this picture, the above picture is the pilot totem, but the below one is the permanent totem. So we also have been working with Transport for Jakarta community to create wayfinding standardization in the past year. Inputs from pilot evaluation was included in the design standard, and bike sharing signage and information has been standardized by this document, which now has been officiated as a governor decree. This will set the informational standard to be followed by any operators as it goes under responsibility of Jakarta Transport Agency. These are the two types of bike share information standardized in the wayfinding guideline, where in the main transit hub, bike share totem would need to include a map with a radius of 15-minute cycling, encouraging public transport passengers to use bike share as their last mile modes. Meanwhile, for the secondary location with less number of trips, the bike share totem type A will still be useful to help users with the QR code. We also conducted public questionnaire. So overall, based on our public questionnaire to evaluate bikeshare services, bikeshare is potential to cater the need for commuting to work, school, and public transport. It perceived not only as a mode that can save time and money, but also for environmental and health causes. Regular bikes are more appealing for those who want the health benefit of cycling. But e-bikes have the future potential as it is faster and not tiring. However, to ensure this potential are met, firstly, we need to tackle the operational issues to gain the interest from potential users. And lastly, for my presentation, to improve bikeshare services in Jakarta, more parking locations are needed to ensure first and last mile connectivity. 96 potential spots have been identified. And informational integration is needed, especially near the 64 transit stations within the bikeshare station radius. Other than that, expanding and improving bikeshare system alone is not enough. A safe, secure infrastructure which are inclusive to vulnerable cyclists should be in line. And Jakarta's government has made commitment to build almost 200-kilometer bike lane this year. Lastly, integrations are not only physical and informational, but also fare and payment system. Jaklingko payment integration will be initiated this year. And bikeshare should be a part of the integration if Jakarta really wants bikeshare to be a more desirable option for its citizens for the first and last mile mobility and be able to compete with online motorcycle taxis. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Over to you, Iwan. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Carlos, and all presenters. So before we move into Q&A, I'll just pose one question to each panelist, but in the meantime, please go ahead and add your questions to the Q&A box, and then we'll do our best to answer them. So a question to Mackenzie. Mackenzie, you were talking about the principles of integration. Can you talk a little bit about different types of urban fabrics and whether all cities, compact and more sprawled, can benefit equally from bikeshare integration?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Glenna. As we saw in the pandemic, there were so many different cities that micromobility was able to fill gaps, whether that was alleviating pressure off of public transport that had limited capacity, or whether that was connecting individuals where there wasn't bus services. So I think a great example of a city that's more sprawling or more peripheral is in Fortaleza. The Bicicleta Integrada bikeshare program allows commuters that are in the more peripheral areas of the city to take bikes home overnight. That itself is unusual and is a wonderful example of where the urban fabric is less dense, how cities can offer a bike share that really fills those gaps. Mexico City implemented a bike share, pop-up lanes along areas where there was a lot of demand for public transport. So I think that's another example of in more dense urban fabrics where integration can really help people, whether that's diversifying modes or covering gaps in the system.
Great, thank you, Mackenzie. And for Pranjal, can you talk a little bit about the provision of electricity going forward within the metro stations and the bus stations?
Yes, fair question, Ivana. I think more and more cycle operators in India are moving towards electric cycles now. And then the provision of electricity at these stations is going to be an issue. So in Chennai's case, we are working with the metro where there are already PVS stations, the bus terminals right now, to make provisions for these electric equipments. The provisions, the electricity would be provided by the corporation itself through the metro or the bus transit system, but the infrastructure would be developed by the service operators. So we are just going to do a pilot soon in the first station that we selected, but eventually there are a lot of issues in that, and working with service providers and the government, they are also reluctant currently because this hasn't been tried in a lot of places yet. Going ahead, hopefully we'll find a solution, and you will see a pilot with pilot stations at the stations. But what is happening currently is service providers do not have charging stations, charging points at the stations, and they take the cycles back to their godowns, recharge and get them back. So it is a logistical issue currently, but it is what it is. We are working on trying to get charging points at the stations.
Great, thank you.
Do add, Smriti, if you have charging points.
And so Carlos, you spoke a lot about the consideration of different types of users and their behaviors. It was interesting to hear this approach through behavioral science. So can you tell us a bit about creating the matrix of different perceptions and cycling experience and applying it in the design process? So what were the methods of gathering the perspectives, or maybe there was a behavioral scientist on board? That's just very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Ioana, for your question. So yeah, we conducted journey experience method because the user of Bikeshare in Jakarta is not so high. So we need to ensure that there are people that use the Bikeshare from the public transportation. We observe their mobility from public transportation to the Bikeshare station without intervening. So we want to really watch their approach to navigate themselves from the public transport to the Bikeshare stations. And after the journey, we also interview them. We interview about their feedback, how they navigate from public transport A to the Bikeshare station A, and so on. And after that, we can conclude what type of behavior, what type of matrix that serve from that intervention. So in some stuff, there are two different typology. The usual users of public transport, they are more rely on physical wayfinding. Meanwhile, for the one who are rarely use public transport, they are more keen to ask to the staff or even use their own mobile phone. So there are different type of mobility if we consider their behavior on using public transport.
Great, thank you. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I'm going to go ahead and pick some questions from the audience. So there's a great actually question here to all of you from Leticia. Leticia is asking, what are the main challenges regarding the physical, informational, payment, and institutional aspects of micromobility integration with public transport? And we can go around, or any of you, I think, can answer, can add to this answer.
Maybe if I can go first. No, I think we did not do any discrete choice model right now because we couldn't do a lot of surveys during the COVID period, and this was a pilot during the COVID period. But what we have done is we have created surveys and questionnaire to assess the perception of the public. It involves all the aspect of safety, inclusivity, accessibility, and their preferred mode and willingness to shift as well. So we are hoping to cover that in the perception survey and then re-strategize the way forward for us as well.
Jump in with some of the research we saw of different cities from the desktop. For payment as well as for institutional integration, it seems like convincing operators that there really are benefits to going through the process of integration is a big challenge in a lot of cities. And then I think I'll leave the physical and informational to Carlos.
Yes, so for the informational integration, I think the most important thing to take into account is the perception between public transport operators, because from our perspective in Jakarta, they have different standards. So it is important to have the same standard guideline for the information so they can follow the same rule.
Great. And go ahead, Smriti.
Yeah. And also with this, one of more major challenge that we also encourage is to create awareness about such micromobility facilities itself in the place, because many people, they think it is a very technical thing to use, or many people do not know how to use it, or many people are not aware of where are these services provided to use it also. So to create awareness about such facilities in a location and to create awareness about how can be it used is also one of the major a challenge that we felt forward.
Great, thank you. And there's another great question to all of you, to both cities, from MA. MA is asking, so for the pilots, what do you consider the most important thing that helped them successful?
For the pilot that we did in Kekenagar, I think getting the service operator and the corporation on board was most important, and that was also our primary parameters. We wanted the corporation team, the government team, to be completely on board and convinced with the project. So that was the most important thing, and then the other physical parameters came later about physical integration. But the acceptance of all the stakeholders was the primary challenge.
Other keys to success?
Can I add more, Iwana?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is the commitment from transport agency for in the city. So for example, in Jakarta, Bikeshare is not a new thing. It was already initiated in 2017, but it stopped because the commitment from the city official is not that high enough. Fortunately, quote unquote, in 2020, the number of cyclists is tenfold. So the government has to respond to that interest. And we hope the transport agency in Jakarta, they can push further this pilot project, this pilot initiative in Jakarta to more formal one with the governor degree.
Thank you. So there are a couple of specific questions and we have about 3 minutes left. There's a question here from Muhammad. About actually location of the Bikeshare. So how is that standpoint location decided? Like which location this cycle, I'm so sorry, location within the station. So what are some tips or some technical specs that the cities followed in terms of the integration?
For Kekenagar in Chennai, this was done during the time of peak COVID, so we couldn't do any discrete models. But as Pranjal said, we conducted perception surveys with the people there, perception surveys to understand their travel pattern. And we did a basic survey because it was during the time of COVID, yeah, to understand the travel needs, yeah.
In the meantime, thank you so much for typing the answers. I can see the panelists typing some answers there. There's a question from Regatu to Carlos. Regatu is asking, are the painted cycle lanes effective in your city? Do you have issues related to encroachment for painted cycle lanes?
Yeah, so we also have that problem. So that's why in Jakarta, we've pushed for protected bike lane in the 200-kilometer plan. And we also think the enforcement from transport agency and police also important to protect the bicycle from the motorcycles, or even another intervention such as speed limitation is also intervention to limit the vehicle speed that would pose danger to cyclists.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any closing remarks from you all? We are about to close the session with some housekeeping. So I just wanted to see if there are some forward-looking closing statements from you. So we will follow up with all the links that were included in the chat today. Of course, with the recording and with the beautiful video of Jakarta Bikeshare. So thank you so much to today's panelists and of course the attendees for joining the